Welcome to Let Fear Bounce, the podcast where we tackle life's challenges head on and discover our resilience. This is your host, Kim Lengling, and today, folks, we have a very special Memorial Day episode in store for you. Joining me today is James Anton. He is not only a dear friend of mine, but also the author of 4 Pictures and a Middle Name, A Swell Soldier's Short Life. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Let Fear Bounce. This is Kim Lengling, your host, and I am so happy that you've decided to spend just a small part of your day with myself today and my special guest and dear personal friend, Rich Anton. Now, Richard James Anton will be formal here. He is a radio broadcaster since 1978, folks, in markets such as Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Indianapolis. He's been an active and vocal advocate for U.S. military veterans, as well as being committed to keep the stories of our deceased veterans alive. He currently lives in Pennsylvania with his wife, Susan, and a crew of fun little critters. He's got cats and dogs, and they keep his house quite lively. Rich, welcome to Let Fear Bounce. It's so fun to have you on today.
Well, thank you, Kim. I've followed your Let Fear Bounce podcast for a while now, and with this project was recently completed, I thought, well, maybe if I beg and grovel and can I be on the show? Can I be on the show? So thank you for the invite. I appreciate it.
Yes. Now let's make that clear, folks. He didn't beg and grovel. he was invited. He's just being a little poohead right now.
Oh, yeah. Well,
now, Rich and I have known each other for years. I think 12 or more years.
More.
And we met through the radio station and through the veteran post that I'm a member of for Project Support Our Troops, I believe.
Yeah.
And years ago, I think we were just chit-chatting, weren't we? We were talking about, man, we need to do something. And you're like, well, hey, maybe, we can get something going through the radio station. And that's when Voices for Vets was born, which is at that time was a twice weekly radio show. We did it on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Yep.
And then it morphed into, you have 4 days a week now with different 5 days a week now.
5 days now, yeah.
That is awesome, with 5 different local to our area veteran organizations that share their events and what's going on in their realms. And I'm on Fridays, but Voices for Vets, started, wow, I think it's over 12 years.
Yeah, it is. It started, I'm thinking 2007 or 8. So that's going on 15, maybe 16 years. Because when we started, we met each other through Veterans of the Vietnam War Post 52, which you were a member of. And I just started kind of hanging out with you all, definitely through Project Support Our Troops, which packs up and ships out items to locally deployed men and women from our area. And I just thought something to get involved with. I thought the radio station would be a perfect fit to help get the word there. That's kind of how we started it. And then over the course of time, get to hang out with a lot of you crazy crew at Post 52. I decided to become a civilian life member as well, just to continue my support. But my role really has just been a megaphone for veteran causes and topics of concern to our veterans. I am not a veteran, but I come from a family full of veterans and honorably served veterans. Some have passed, some died in the line of service, others lived long, healthy lives. And just surrounding myself over these many years with all these men and women has inspired me to keep their memories alive, keep their stories alive, and primarily the stories. Because a lot of them don't like to share stories.
You are right. You are right. And I know over the years, you've spoken over the years to so many veterans, on the quiet side, just having conversations.
Yeah.
And in 2004, for 14 years, I wrote a monthly column for the local newspaper, and they were all interviews with veterans. And doing that, learning these stories, like you said, the stories, they need to be told, because each of those veterans and each veteran that you meet is a part of history. And some of them, a lot actually, that I've known and met are quiet about it. They keep it quiet and on the down low. But every once in a while, they feel free enough to share their story and say, and give you, the honor of being able to share it more. And it
That's a
truly
that's
is,
a gift.
it's humbling. It is. It's a gift. It's
It's a gift.
humbling, and it's an honor because so many of them carry an awful lot with them still decades later. And I never push, and I know you don't. And I never ask questions unless they decide they want to start sharing. And then I'll say, do you mind if I ask you a question? Or could you clarify that? But it's so humbling and such an honor. And I know you mentioned your family members, long line through the history of your family of veterans. And through the years and over the years of our friendship, you had often talked about your uncle. And you said, his records had been lost and you'd really like to learn more about him. And he was a World War II veteran.
Aerial engineer. So he was in support of the pilot and co-pilot. As you mentioned, all I knew about him is that your Uncle Jim, I'd heard when I was a kid, your Uncle Jim died in a plane crash in the Second World War, and your middle name is his name. And I said, okay, that's awesome. As a young person too, you don't sometimes even probe and try to explore a little bit. You're just like, that was so long ago. It was 1942. And I was born in 1959. So 17 years after he died, I was the first grandchild in the family, and I was given his name. My father was 6 years old when his older brother, Jim, died in the war.
So it was,
And
you were quite far removed from it.
very far removed. And all I heard was just a handful of stories. Again, 4 pictures that were passed along to me of him in uniform, and then the name. Nobody else in the family remembered him because no one else, either they were too young or they had passed away already. So that was such a generation, 2 generations ago. And
Right.
so,
Yeah. And then you were like, I want to learn. I want to learn
yeah,
more about this guy because, like you said, all you had was 4 pictures and a middle name.
that's it. And that's the name of the book. But it was just a project that I started working on because I've always been kind of a history nerd anyway, and always specifically about the Second World War. And because I had family members, heck, my paternal grandfather served in the First World War. My father, because of his age and the fact that his older brother died during serving his country, he was the last son left in the family, so he was exempt from serving. So he did not serve. But I had grandfathers and uncles and a variety of uncles, quite honestly, that served. But Uncle Jim in particular, James, was always a mystery, but yet also a challenge for me, and just to learn. And as a young person, you don't ask questions, you don't really care much until you get a little older, a little bit more reflective.
What was that one thing that you were like, you know what? I'm going to start digging deeper. I'm going to find out more about my Uncle James, and I just want to find out more.
Well, just digging a little deeper through a lot of your support and some other members of the Post, I just thought I had at least maybe an in to getting information, at least a path to finding information, because I had no idea what I could find from him. And just doing some initial research, asking about World War II records in particular, because my wife's father, he survived the war, but his records were all gone. I'm like, well, why'd that happen? And digging a little deeper, where all these records were kept for these World War I and World War II veterans specifically, kept in a storage facility in St. Louis. And 1978 thereabouts, and all these records, by the way, this was before digital, before everything was handwritten, everything was paper. And so that's what was stashed away. And in 1978, a big wing of that facility burnt down. And with that destruction of that facility, many records were permanently lost from these World War II and World War I guys. My wife's father's records completely gone. All we just know is his discharge paper, and that's all we have. But other than that, and I thought, well, I'm probably going to run into that as well, maybe with my uncle. I don't know. So the process was simple, to just start and request any records that were available from him. And that's
And
where it started.
what a journey. Because I remember the months and months of you doing some digging, and then you'd get another little piece and you'd be like, oh my gosh, look at this. I've got this. And you had 4 pictures in a middle name. But you also ended up with his diary.
Well,
Now, how
even
did that,
prior to
because I know
that,
that wasn't all at the beginning. So how did this
uh,
all transpire? How did it all unfold?
the diary came just a little later than that. But what really prompted and got the story started was requesting and successfully getting all my uncle's military records. Since I was then the next of kin after everybody passed away, I requested and was given his records. I didn't know what I'd be getting. They sent me a letter initially saying there was a fire there. We don't know what we'll get, but we'll try our best. And then it was a waiting period for like 2 months. And then I got a call from Veteran Services to say, hey, we have a package here for you from the government. We thought maybe you'd like to see, and told you about it. And 80 pages of official records from my uncle from the time he enlisted in April of 1941, before even war broke out, and to his actually through his autopsy when he died in 1942. That every dental record, every physical exam, every test he took, I have his his fingerprints. I know how tall he was, how much he weighed, whether he had a hernia or not. I mean, I thought, all those nice specific details that come through military physicals. I knew enough about him there, but again, didn't know the man at all. I just knew all the stats about him, and that he enlisted as a regular Army in 1940, April 41. Prior to going into the Army, he was a pilot. He used to pilot Cessnas and Piper Cubs, and that's what he did. He was a mechanic in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, and that was his thing. He wanted to fly. Going into the service with an intent of eventually becoming a pilot, he found out when he got in there, you can't become a pilot unless you're an officer. Only officers are pilots and co-pilots. But he wanted to get in the air, so the next best thing would be, well, he's going to use his mechanic background, and he plunged into aerial engineer work, and eventually got his certificate to be an onboard mechanic for some of these airplanes, and specifically the B-26. So this journey, I have all his tests results of passing all the things he needed to pass. Then again, through his autopsy, so at least I had official records of who he was, but there was still that piece was missing. Like, who was he? What kind of car did he like to drive? What music did he listen to? Did he have a girlfriend? He was 23 when he died. So, think of 23-year-olds today. Now, military 23-year-olds, different from civilian 23-year-olds. We know that people grow up a lot faster. But I wondered about him and what influences, DNA influences are that I carry. Am I carrying any of Jim around? And all those kinds of things. I didn't know anything about that. Fast forward, then I had all these records, and I showed those to you. You read some of them. I couldn't understand because without the military background, you were able to clarify some things, and some pretty painful things looking at that too. He died in a crash that was horrific, as any plane crash would be.
And those records, they just tell it like it is. Boom.
It's just detail, no emotion, no, just
right.
just
It
the
is
facts.
hard to read.
And it was hard to read. It was horrific. It really was. And such a fact that the plane crash took the lives of my uncle and the pilot and co-pilot of that particular aircraft on September 2nd, 1942. And they're all, because of the nature of the crash, the violence involved with that crash. The three bodies were interred together because that's through the request of the military and the acceptance by the families to say yes, do that. They were a unit. They were buried as a unit, and they were buried together in St. Augustine, Florida.
Now let's clarify. They were test flying the B-26
Yes.
Marauders.
Yes.
So these folks, now these guys, think this is like another level of courage, folks. The way I see it, they're testing planes that are pretty much untested, getting them ready to ship overseas to help the United States in their efforts in World War II against Germany. Now, oh my goodness, wrap your brains around that. They're testing these planes for combat. And there was, for the B-26 Marauder, there were many, many, many crashes, and there was a nickname for them.
Yeah, they nicknamed that plane there are quite a few of them, but there was a phrase that "one a day in the bay." The Widowmaker was one of them. It was, and again, we didn't get that initially. We just got that he died in a plane crash in a B-26 Marauder, and we saw all the correspondence, the specific military correspondence when the plane went down, and how long it took to recover the bodies. How long did it? I mean, every little nook and cranny was covered in that. And so, I got that impression that he, because then digging a little deeper into the book, then we found out, as he said, the nicknames for that plane. But that plane was being prepped, getting ready to go to Europe specifically. They did some flying in the South Pacific, but mostly European. It was a mid-range, middle-level bomber, so it wasn't one of the big ones, but it was. They would call that, my goodness sakes, the flak. Oh, they called it flak bait. That's what they called it, because that took all the flak from the guns on the ground as they're trying to drop their bombs. And sometimes they wasn't a higher altitude bomber like the bigger ones, so these would fly lower, and they would take a lot of that abuse. But when we found out a little bit more later about specifically what Jim did and what his background was, I found out about his service through his own words, and how that came about. Like I said, my father was much younger. He didn't know his brother. I mean, he was 6. He was in first grade. All he knew that Jim was another adult in the house. And all he knew that when his brother died, that mom and dad had to call aunts and uncles to come stay with him at home in Pittsburgh while they went to Florida to bury their firstborn son. And that's all I knew. My dad didn't know him, so I couldn't quiz my dad. He no recollection much. So when my father passed, I was given a lot of things, his personal belongings. My father and I, just backtrack a little bit. My father and I were estranged for most of my life. My parents divorced when I was young, so I saw my dad occasionally, but not a whole lot. We reconnected and got a little bit more closer towards the end of his life. Still didn't get anything more about Jim, but I got, at least reconnected with him. When he passed and I got all his personal belongings, one of the things that came in a box of personal belongings was a strong box. And it just said on the top, James Anton. And I just like, whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, whoa. So
Right.
this is about, I didn't nothing about, all I knew that this box was there. And my guess was that box was never opened since 1942. Because inside the box were personal belongings and effects from Sgt James Anton. Inside were letters from home that he wrote home to his mom. There were 4 pristinely written letters. He had excellent penmanship, by the way. There were his patches, his insignias, his pins. The most important treasure I found was a diary. And this diary, again, I go back to how neat his penmanship was. This was a very introspective, neatly written, thoroughly personal diary that was written he started, like, I guess they gave all these guys diaries, all these military folks, when they first enlisted, diaries. They expect everybody to write everything they're going to do, and everybody they've met. Most people probably did not do that. Jim did. It's a diary full of it's a great story. And it starts
It's a
from
step back in time. It is a step when
you've read it.
I've read it many times. And it is truly a step back in time, because there were a lot of times, I know when I was reading it, I had to stop for a minute and just kind of reflect and think, because you're reading something that's so personal from 1941, when the world was in turmoil. And
Yeah.
as you said, he was 23 years old when he died.
Yeah.
It was truly, truly amazing to read. And what a treasure chest you inherited there.
I'm again, it's a blessing. It was a blessing. It was a gift, I think, from above, without a doubt, that there was a reason why this was given to me. There was a reason why I had to write and tell this man's story. Once that diary was in my hands, we read that diary and got to see what a United States Army serviceman was going through from the time he enlisted. He was processed at Fort Indiantown Gap. I mean, a lot of places in Pennsylvania where are familiar to military servicemen and women. They know these places. It starts with him logging in as he joined regular army, and he talks about boot camp. He talks about pain and suffering that he had to go through in various parts of the country, the heat and humidity and the mud and the slop. But he always wanted to fly. And at some point in August of 1941, again, war hasn't broken out yet, but he decided he wanted to try to go for the Air Corps. So he asked for and was granted a discharge from regular Army. The next day he enlisted and was granted admission into the U.S. Army Air Corps. And that began his journey that hopefully he would be able to get in the air. Just wanted to be in the air. But the story continues, all his training, the Air Corps training that was involved, the different places that he served, sitting in a barracks in one part of the diary where he says, sitting in a United States Army barracks, listening to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt say that we're now at war, that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And he said it was very surreal to sit in an Army barracks listening to that, knowing that, okay, we knew it was coming, but here we go. It was
it's truly amazing.
Yeah.
I want to share something.
Yeah.
Because not only you had mentioned also there were letters that he had written home. I remember you telling me in one of our many conversations about the book when you were creating this, that when his personal effects were received, they were put in the attic and never brought out again by
my grandparents. It's too painful. This was their firstborn son. And again, he was born in 1919, and these are older people now. In come 1940s, they were older people. And my dad was, well, I can say it on the show. My dad was an oops baby. He popped into the world later on in the world. So he always talked about older people in the house. That's all my dad would remember. My grandmother lived I was a senior in high school, and she was always gray haired and very old. That's how I remember her. She was that older of a grandmother. But yeah, it was too painful. Both my grandmother and grandfather, they went, buried him, and they brought his effects back, put him up on a shelf in a closet, and they didn't talk about him again.
And that generation seems, I've found, at least through my family, that generation, that is how it was done.
That's how it was done.
I want to share a part of his letter, of one of his letters. So it says, "Dear Mom and Pop," and this is from August 26th of 1942. "Dear Mom and Pop and Dick, being as I haven't been able to write for a few days, I have a lot of letters piled up to answer, so I'll write to everyone at once. I've been flying the pants off me, but I'm still on the beam, only I don't get much sitting down time. We went out yesterday on a flight and, skipping the details, ran into some terrible storms on the way in, tried to fly around them, and ended up on the Atlantic coast, closed in on all sides. We were lucky and found a field to land at. It was a pursuit base, and very seldom do they see bombers, so we were the whole cheese." I just love reading his letters and his diary because they are so personal, and they're written in the way he would speak, and a lot of the terminology from the 40s is used. Culturally, things were much different back in the 40s.
Title, A Swell Soldier's Short Story. Swell, I'm going to have to go through the book again and count the number of swells in the book. But
right. Yes, swell is a word that's
swell is the buzzword. Right.
Yeah, that's the tagline of the story. The name of the book, again, folks, is 4 pictures and middle name: A Swell Soldier's Short Life.
Now, he writes, again, the diary starts in April of 41 and ends in September of 1942. Specifically in 42, where he got almost daily entries. Kind of a rolling story in 1941, but starting in 42, almost every day had a diary entry. And anybody who has served in the military can probably attest to this, whether it was combat or whether you're stateside, your duties of what you're trained for. You have probably 80% of your time is mundane, routine, but 20% or so is where you're really busy with what your focus is and your purpose in the military. That might be if you're serving overseas, that 20% of just downtime and other things, but that that 80% it's downtime, that 20% it gets busy, the dangerous parts of it. Sometimes that's the stuff folks don't want to talk about. They'll talk about, oh yeah, we had fun in Manila, and we in Hawaii, and we raced jeeps in the desert just for fun. But when you talk about some serious stuff, it gets a little bit more personal, a little bit more private. That's where they generally don't want to clam up. But here, he gets to write his thoughts, and he writes specifically about. We were talking about the planes that the Widowmaker, the One a Day in the Bay. The B-26 was the workhorse of World War II, but it took a long time before it got to that point where it could be the workhorse. This was a B-26B bomber that crashed and took the life of my uncle and two others. I think they got up to like G. It might be F or G before they finally tested and ready for service. And so 6-month period during September, between August and October of 42, they were losing. They were saying one a day in the Bay. Some of these crashes, they were able to save the crewmen. Many they couldn't. They crashed on the runway. They crashed on takeoff. They crashed into the Bay, Tampa Bay. They were based out of MacDill Field in Tampa Bay, Florida. That's where his last place he was stationed at.
Now remember, folks, they were testing these planes. It wasn't pilot error for all these crashes. These were airplanes that they were testing to get to the point where they could be used in combat. So they were brand new. The world had not seen these yet.
Right. They were tweaking. The pilots had to learn to fly different versions of this airplane. The mechanics, things were changing. Well, this didn't work. Let's try this now. Fingers crossed. Let's hope it goes.
Now think about it. I mean, with an honest answer, I'll ask you, because I know what my answer would be. This is what you're doing. You know that you're going to be testing these airplanes that no one's ever flown before. And every day, one a day in the Bay, every day you're seeing one of these planes go down. I can't even wrap my brain around that. And then knowing that you're getting in the next one to test it, you're going to be in there as either the engineer sitting in the turret, or you're going to be the pilot or the co-pilot, what have you. But you've just seen some of your buddies go down. Maybe you've seen your buddies go down for the last 3 days in a row, and now it's your turn. Yeah. I mean, I can't even wrap my brain around that.
When you're 23 years old, though, I'm just guessing, when you're 23 and your whole life is at that moment preparing to serve your country in Germany or the Pacific, that's why you're there. And you know you're going to go either, or you want to go either there, either of those two locations. You're going to think, I'm thinking that at least he thought, and maybe some of these others, we're going to be the ones to get it right. What we do now in our test flight is going to be the right one. And then we get to go.
Back then, again, it was culturally different. Mindsets were different. Patriotism was very high.
This was the last time that we were at war that it was truly, we were probably more united because it truly was a global war. It wasn't just a small area of the world. It was a global war. And that war affected so many people in this country because of German heritage, European heritage. We were predominantly German. We were predominantly European heritage, this country. And so that whole part of your heritage, your family, where you came from, was on fire because of the Nazis. And over the other side of the world,
well, and think about just here in America, there were victory gardens, and women were taking the place of all of the men, because back then it was the men who worked, the women stayed home. That was just the culture then. But they were out there. The women were the ones out there doing all the men's jobs, the quote unquote men's jobs then, because the men were all, shipping off. So just, in victory gardens and rationing, you had a ration book. I mean, no one of my generation or even your generation, I don't think we've not experienced that. So it's very hard for me to mentally put myself in those shoes. But what an amazing time in our history. Like you said, they were united. Everybody was working towards the same cause, whether you were growing a garden so you could eat your own food, so you didn't have to use, you had to keep your ration book the best you could because you could only get one little tiny pat of butter per week. What an amazing time in history. And I don't know, this is just my opinion, and it's my show, so I'm going to share it. I think that the mindset of in general of Americans could do with a bit of a shift of being more united and caring more for one another instead of purposely trying to be divisive.
Agreed.
This book, first off, I love the title, Four Pictures in the Middle Name. I've always loved the title. When your book came out, and we worked very closely.
We did, because this was my first time doing this, and you've been an author for quite some time, and I was looking to you for coaching, some guidance on how to do this, and you became very, very involved with helping that along, and I'm forever grateful for that. Because when it finally came out, we finally saw that pressing and holding it in your hand. I mean, it's not a very thick book. It's an easy read. It's a quick read because, well, the story is just about Jim's military life, and it was short. It was a year and a half, and that was it. And that's just his story. I would like to write another one if I had ways of knowing what was he like, what kind of what kind of pie did he like. I did get some things out of the diary, that some music that he was listening to, and he makes a couple of comments about flying overnight training missions over the Gulf of Mexico, 2 feet above the water surface, listening to Jay Jurgens and his big band sounds. He says nothing the best reception ever is in a B-26 over the Gulf in the middle of the night with the moon shining. I mean, things like that, sitting in the nose cone and talking like that. But all these things that we were leading up to his final days, he stayed focused the entire time. We were talking about, was he second guessing his reason for being there? Not at all. He was clearly focused. And like I said, I think he and his crew wanted to get it right. He was fortunate because he loved to fly, but wasn't allowed to fly, being he was enlisted. He was not an officer. He was smart enough to pal up to a lot of the lieutenants and second lieutenants, the pilots and co-pilots, who, when they got out over the water for training missions, they let him slide into the cockpit chair and take over the controls. So he writes about that in the book and what that feeling was. The records show that 2:30 a.m. September 2nd, his B-26 went down with 2 others into the Gulf of Mexico, and that was it. I try to wrap my head around, and I don't want to do it too much because it's hard. What were his thoughts? What were his thoughts at that moment? Like, oh no, was it mechanical? Was it pilot error? Was it atmosphere? Was it weather conditions? We don't know. And there were so many that went down that they really couldn't ascertain what brought all these planes down. They just had a common number, and they said, well, back to the drawing board. And we went on to find out through some research you and I did, 13,000 plus men and women died in training accidents alone. They wore the same boots. They wore the same stripes. Their heads were in the same place as those who were flying and serving in Europe and in the South Pacific. It's just they never got a chance to go. But their intentions were pure and simple. We want to be where the action is, and we're training to be there. Unfortunately for that crew, the airship that they were on just decided it was not going to cooperate that day, and it went down. And so I wonder, what was he thinking? Again, he's 23 years old, and I can't get into thinking too much of that. That's kind of cruel and unusual to do that.
Yeah, that's a rabbit hole that will take you nowhere. Read about he's flying above 3 layers of clouds, and being a pilot has got to be the best job.
Beautiful flying, went above 3 layers of cloud like a picture. Makes one realize that flying is the best job. Going to get more of it tonight between 11:30 and 4. And with that, I know this is Memorial Day now, so I think about him. I think about all who've paid the ultimate price, but I think of at least the hero in my life and in my world, who I never met. But yet I feel after the records we got together and after the diary, I feel like I know this man a little bit more. I feel that I feel a kindred spirit with him. I think there's got to be some DNA in there. There definitely is some DNA in my body, courtesy of James Anton. So someday we'll meet each other, and someday we'll talk about this project that I took under, and you gave so much help to. And I just hope it honors him. That's the whole purpose, is to honor his life. And as we said at the beginning of this podcast, to tell the stories. The stories are important. They are history. But these are stories of human beings. He was a regular Joe. He wasn't any better than you or I. He was just a regular Joe who felt the call even before war broke out. He sensed something was happening, and he wanted to be a part of it. He wanted to be a part of the history that was ready to unfurl. And that's something special. That's a special kind of human being, regardless if it's World War II, World War I, Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, and Iraq, that you want to be there. You want to be, there's a calling, a higher calling, say, I need to be there too, because.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, we all can't say that. And only the people who have done that can get it. Like I said, I'm not a veteran, but the many veterans that I do know from all the various military campaigns that I've been blessed to have been able to talk to, and some of which they would have some very good conversations with. But like you kind of just thank them and say, I appreciate who you are today. And I know who you are today is because of what you were so many years ago. And that's the eternal thanks that I can offer all my veteran family and friends on this Memorial Day, that those who are buried, those who you see oceans of flags in all the cemeteries around this country. It's heartbreaking. It's joyous. It's bittersweet, but it's a reminder that, again, freedom is not free. It's a trite phrase, but it's so true. Freedom is not free. Those flags flying in the wind is just, it's because of the final breaths of those who gave all to keep us free. So I like to think I have a family member. I don't like to brag to say that we were the first in our block to have a gold star on our house. That's another thing that I found a little later on too, that it was early on in the war. So he was the first in our family, first on the block. So.
And that was probably tough for the entire neighborhood, because neighborhoods were different back then too. And since this is Memorial Day, folks, and I appreciate all of you tuning in and listening and taking just a little bit of your time today or this evening, whatever the case may be. But you had mentioned the sea of flags that will be placed around placed on all of the cemeteries across this country of ours. And, I've often thought that, as those flags are waving in the wind, they're providing all those, I think, in my brain, it's those little whispers from each individual that has passed, just saying thank you for remembering.
Yeah.
It's
nice. Yep.
It's, all those, that's how I picture it. Each flag that's waving in a breeze on Memorial Day is a whisper from that veteran saying thank you for remembering me.
Well,
and that's what this day is all about: remembrance,
yep,
and reverence and thankfulness.
Well, I want to just thank you though for all the help that you provided with putting this book together. It was easy because it was primarily just transcribing a diary, but it was also the story of how I discovered this diary and all the work that went into it. That's kind of what it was really about, and it gets me inspired to write maybe another one. I have my grandfather who has passed away some years ago, but he was a World War II veteran as well. He was a paratrooper in Germany, glider crew. He served and jumped in France, Belgium, and Germany, and I got to learn his stories about 5 years before he died. Because as a kid, oh, tell me about your story, Grandpa, and he's like, oh, someday, About 5 years before he passed, it had been about 8, 9 years ago now, he called me up, and he was living in a retirement home in Pittsburgh, and he called me up and said, "What are you doing on Sunday?" I said, "Come to see you." He goes, "Good." He said, "Bring a pizza. I've got some stories to tell you." Like, yes. So I said, "Can I record you?" He said, "Sure." He said, "Do that because I'm forgetting things now, and I'd like to pass this." He said, "You're the one I think that cares enough to take these stories and do something with them." But great. So I recorded him. I have a 2-hour conversation on digital recorder of him telling his stories. So, and some stories I did not know about, so interesting stories, fun stories, sad stories, but nonetheless, another hero that I'm going to probably put together a story. So don't go too far away because
Yeah.
it'll be a good review.
I'll help you get it together.
I appreciate it.
This has been such a pleasure, Rich, and it's so fun to have actually a personal friend on to chit chat about something that we worked closely together on, and the end result was just amazing. And what an honor to your uncle. Again, folks, that the book is 4 Pictures and a Middle Name. A Swell Soldier's Short Life is available on Amazon, so you can get your copy whenever you like, folks. And the author, of course, is Sgt James Anton. So, Rich, thank you so much for being my guest today on this special day in this special episode for Memorial Day on Let Fear Bounce. I truly appreciate your time.
Appreciate you as well. And folks want to listen to Kim on my radio show in the morning, Friday mornings. It's just tune in My Rocky Radio. It's on all the app stores, and it's easy to find us. And you can listen to Kim and I yak it up on Friday mornings as well. So, thank you, Kim. As always, you're my bud. Appreciate you.
Awesome. Thank you again. And everybody out there listening, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Let Fear Bounce, this special Memorial Day episode. Everybody out there, be well, stay well, and be blessed. Thank you so much, folks, for listening in on this special Memorial Day episode of 2024. As I chatted with my dear friend, Rich Anton, the author of 4 Pictures and a Middle Name, A Swell Soldier's Short Life. Now be sure to hit that like and subscribe, folks. It helps the channel and the show keep going. Don't forget, we are available on all listening platforms for podcast as well as YouTube. So be sure to check it out on YouTube and like and subscribe there. Once again, folks, thanks so much for spending just a small part of your time today with me on Let Fear Bounce. Be well, stay well, and above all, be blessed.